we are jumping into part 2 of our series under construction, looking at our spiritual architecture. And it matters so much how we build our lives, and who we build with, and what we build on. And furthermore, it matters who we put in the spot of general contractor. I have good friends that build, and they build really well, and that's their job. And then I have good friends, and they build because they know what they're doing. And then I have other friends that I don't think I would call them to build a treehouse. And I would put I'm treehouse level builder, okay? So if you need me to build a treehouse, I'm there. If you need me to build a house, you're out of luck. But it really matters who you put in that spot. And actually, in the spirit of fun, I'd like to show you a few pics of what happens when somebody without wisdom or a plan gets a hold of do-it-yourself fever. Who's ever had DIY fever? Like, I think I can just do that. I don't need to call somebody. I'm going to try. Well, here's the first picture. This is what happens when somebody doesn't know what they're doing but has DIY fever. So that's awesome. That's when you don't know that there's a cover that has two spaces, or maybe they're just too far apart. Let's look at the next one. These are great. I relate to some of these. I want you to tell me how that's going to work when they remodeled the sidewall. Picture 3. That's my favorite. I think that was his diet plan. Like, if I can't get to the food, I can't eat the food. And we'll have a few more of those each week, just because I so love seeing those, because it reminds me over and over again, you have to not only have a plan, you have to have somebody that's in charge, that knows what they're doing and how to build. Otherwise, you're in trouble. And for us, we're looking at how we build our lives as followers of Christ. Now, no matter how great a home you build, especially in Washington, it has to stand up to the elements, right? And Scripture encourages us to guard our hearts. In fact, we did a series in fall, several weeks, just on what it means to guard our hearts in all kinds of situations. It's just this important, compelling thought from Scripture. And it tells us that God desires to guard our hearts and minds, that there's even peace that will guard our hearts and minds in Christ. And today is about that weatherproof siding. So if we're thinking of building, today we're talking weatherproof siding. And really what it means for us spiritually is clothing ourselves. Now, I married into a wonderful extended Norwegian family. And it became fun really quick. We camp every year at a Sons of Norway campground, which is really fun. Get to hang out with my wife's family. I remember when I first met her extended family, we drove up north, and suddenly there's these really, and when I say large, like here's their chests, large Norwegian men standing on either side of me going, "You're going to take care of her, right?" Like, that was my introduction to my wife's family. I was like, yes, with everything I have, just don't kill me. I'll do good by all of you, I promise. And I got to enjoy things like lefse, which is fantastic, and learn how to make it. And I enjoyed, I'll use the word interesting things like lutefisk, which the best way to describe it is if you like your Jell-O to be boiled and taste and have a fishy taste. So if you like boiled fishy Jell-O, you're in. And actually, I make it sound worse than it is. It wasn't terrible. It's just unique. Okay, it's a unique thing. And so between the Sons of Norway, the lefse, the lutefisk, these large Viking men ready to kill me, it was fun getting to know her side of the family. And now for 26 years, it's just been a joy getting really close to several of them. There's a fantastic Norwegian saying, and here it is. Would anybody like to have a go at it? Okay, so I'm actually pretty captivated by linguistics and words and languages. It's really interesting to me. And so I listened to this for a long time, a person saying it so that I could say it this morning, and I just can't. I think if I took an hour and just kept going through it, I could. But let me tell you what, their language is very unique in its pronunciation, and yeah, you don't want to see that happen this morning. You want to have a better morning than me trying to say that. But I can tell you what it means roughly, because it's a very common Scandinavian saying that they all say, and it's this, that there's no bad weather, only bad choices of clothing. or only bad clothes, right? Okay, so that's their thought. Like, hey, if the weather's bad, you still kick your kids out and they go play. You just get bigger coats. You get ways to clothe yourself from the elements, and that's kind of their idea. And in other words, just get a thicker coat, right? Get something that matches the elements. On the other side of that coin, we have my favorite survivalist and adventurer, Bear Grylls, who I just really, I'm actually reading his biography right now. He's a blast. And I've appreciated him and his approach to survival. And because of him, I want to like he does these things where he gets together with celebrities and they jump out of helicopters in the water and climb things and eat sheep eyeballs and do all kinds of weird stuff, right? I'm not a celebrity and I really don't care to be, but I would really like to hang out with him for a day and try all those things. Here's what he said. In fact, Bear, if you're watching, I don't know if you are, but let's do this, okay? Let's jump out of things together. He's not watching. But here's what he said, which I liked about weather. He said, and he's a survivalist, so he says, weather can kill you so fast. And the first priority of survival is getting protection from the extreme weather. Okay, so regardless of if you in either camp on this, between the well-known Scandinavian phrase or something where in what Bear Grylls is saying, do you see that they both point to the same solution? There's a similar solution in both of what they're saying, which is this. Like, you need to be weatherproofed. You need to be protected. You need to find a way to be in the elements, because the elements are going to be there, and you need to find a way to stand strong through them. So we're going to talk today about clothing ourselves. And last week, I referenced a passage that Paul wrote in Colossians. And today, we're just going to take more time to camp out on it and break it down. And it's about learning to build an exterior that can handle the weather and protect so that the weather does not get inside us and rot us from the inside out. So we're reading from Colossians chapter 3, verses 11 through 14 today. It reads, "Here there is no Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity." And I want you to remember this as we move into what we're clothed by, okay? So the background of this, I want you to continue to have in mind as we're about to move forward is this. We are freed in Jesus from pursuing status or promoting our lives based on where we came from. Okay, and so this was something Paul is hugely passionate about. In fact, going so far in other things that he had written to say, look at all that I have, and I no longer put that forward in front of everybody as my main source of identity. In fact, some of you maybe remember Bob Carr just a few weeks ago preached on this, that this is not my foundation for the biggest part of who I am. And this isn't the status I push on you. And he's saying in the same way, we're freed from pursuing status anymore and promoting our lives with each other based on where we come from. It's now about the kingdom that Jesus is establishing and the love of God that is in us and the humbling and almost terrifying thought of wanting to make us his home. That he actually wants to dwell in us and live in us through faith. And so, this is what I want in the back of your mind as we go. One thing to keep in mind as we read through these, and I'm just going to look through those first 5 words that he talked about, they all promote focusing outside yourself. And that's why I say they're very freeing. It sounds like, it's like, well, what about me? They're actually, the more that you're able to focus on these things, the more free you are from the tyranny of self. So it's a very good thing. This life as a house is not lived for yourself. Remember, you are a home, a temple for the Lord. So the more that he has opportunity to reinvent your life to be a home by which he dwells, the better for you, the better for everyone around you. So you would think that weatherproofing our lives is all about hunkering inward. But actually, these things that are about clothing yourself enable you to live in the elements and to love outward. So it's not about hunkering down, it's not about hiding away, it's about living boldly by clothing yourself with these 5 elements. remember, we're bought at a price, and this new exterior siding, it's meant to keep us reaching out and ministering and loving well and not hiding away from a culture that needs to see the love of Jesus. So we'll start, and I'm just going to go through all 5 of them. So we're on this part 1, and part 1 is the siding. Okay, I'm going to call it the siding, because this is Paul says, hey, therefore, clothe yourself, put this siding on. And I'm just going to walk through these 5 words. First, compassion, which sounds to me kind of like care with some feet. It's relating to others with care. It can be listening. It's being willing to see others' needs as important to you. And with each one, I'm going to talk about, without weatherproofing with this, what gets into our life. If you don't have siding, what gets in, and then some ideas on how to weatherproof yourself a little bit. So I think without weatherproofing with compassion, indifference seeps in, and coldness seeps in. Which is not, of course, not the heart of Jesus. We see that if anybody lived a life opposite of indifference or coldness, it would be Jesus. But this is what happens. Without that siding, indifference comes in. We become careless to other people's needs. And remember, Jesus, who's the homeowner and current resident, wants to love through your life, wants to see you as a conduit in how you treat others. And indifference kills his mission quicker than almost anything else I can think of. In fact, nothing kills the mission like indifference. So compassion keeps us outward focused and loving well. So for compassion, weatherproofing, I encourage you to pray that God gives you vision to see others like he does, and then respond accordingly. The second word is kindness. Kindness. Kindness is being humane. It's being sympathetic. It is being considerate. And you have to consider somebody in order to be kind, wouldn't you say? You have to think about who they are. Otherwise, it's not kindness, it's niceness. And niceness is something that is kind of like saccharine in our culture, like niceness, but kindness is deeper. It's really considering the person. And to put somebody in view as to what can help that person, what do they need. Now, kindness, I would say, is sometimes difficult. It can be a challenge, and I think maybe if we're being honest, we'd sometimes say, yeah, kindness, it does not come easy sometimes. Psalms 141, verse 5, I just want to read this because it says, let a righteous man strike me, it's a kindness. Let him rebuke me, it's oil on my head will not refuse it. Which at first, to some of us, if we're not going to think deeper, it might sound like, hey, we should start a ministry of smacking people upside the head. Isn't that what it's saying? No, not in the name of kindness. But what it's saying is that if someone cares and shows kindness towards us, sometimes it means that they're willing to consider how they might have to challenge us or confront us. And that's why we have to be clothed in kindness if we're going to do something like that. I have friends who have loved me well enough to tell me things that hurt to hear, but it was like a strike on my head. It was a kindness. It was like oil on my head to rebuke me. It was something I needed in that moment. Of course, that takes relationship, but it takes a relationship in which you're clothed in kindness to do so. Without weatherproofing in kindness, we get meanness, uncaring. A meanness is sometimes delight in somebody's plight, and kindness just can't take that. Kindness helps us steer clear of the hurtful jabs that we want to take at others, or it insulates us from that mean streak that wants to rejoice when others are hurting and be upset when others are rejoicing. Instead of what's the biblical command? Rejoice when people are rejoicing. Be sorrowful when they're sorrowful, right? And kindness keeps us in that Jesus mode of living. So for kindness weatherproofing, start practicing it today. Go into situations wondering and curious about what others might need. And what could help to be a blessing. Third, humility. If you need lessons on humility, come see me afterwards. I'm awesome at it. Thank you. Oh, my mom and my cousin laughed, so I guess that's good enough. Humility is huge, and is that telling? The people who know me most are like, yeah, that's not you. Humility is huge, and it's one of these beautiful, strong weatherproofers. It's sometimes hard to define because it's definitely not that groveling, low servant we think of, or the person wailing that they're nothing or can do nothing. That's not humility either. In fact, sometimes the lowest downest person is still struggling with pride, or the person that says they can't get anything right, they're looking for an attention that humility could otherwise guard them from and safeguard them from. So whether an overly confident spirit or a lacking down spirit, both are still excessively focused on themselves. And Archbishop William Temple had this to say, which I thought was beautiful. It says, humility does not mean thinking less of yourself than other people, nor does it mean having a low opinion of your own gifts. It means freedom from thinking about yourself at all. And so that's a beautiful thought of humility, is not having an inflated or deflated view. It's being able to just see yourself as less as possible, because you're not having to be focused on yourself. Now, without weatherproofing in humility, self-importance comes in. Call it pride, call it extreme self-pity, whatever it is. It becomes self-absorption. And remember that pride puffs up, but what does love do according to the text? It builds up. It builds up. So I want to have a life that builds people up, not puffs myself up. So if you want that humility weatherproofing, keep it about learning to love God, not proving what you know and who you are. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 3 tells us that we know that we all possess knowledge. What does knowledge do? It puffs up. But love builds up. The man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know, but the man who loves God is known by God. So the focus is not to discredit knowing and learning. Rather, it's to say that knowledge alone puffs up. Humility keeps us taking what we know and continuing to love God through loving others, which is the point. Gentleness is next. Gentleness is kind of like a word like meekness, often misunderstood. It doesn't mean being timid. It doesn't mean being weak. It definitely does not mean showing cowardice. Gentleness has nothing to do with having no strength. In fact, it is pure strength. It's the strength of restraint and strength of choice in difficult and demanding situations. It's deciding that I will not be a slave to my anger, my response, but rather I will show restraint by being gentle. And we know that that gentleness, therefore, is true godly power in that sense. It's a quiet strength that knows how to respond with gentleness of conduct, especially in situations that could call for other responses. It is to be free of bitterness and contentiousness with peace and strength of spirit. Jesus, in fact, his meekness was an amazing show, and his gentleness was an amazing show of strength. In fact, while on trial, he didn't get self-assertive and fall into a trap. In fact, we see in Matthew 27, verses 12 through 14, at a point of being on trial, that he didn't answer their questions. Why? Because he wasn't going to respond in a way that played the game that they were trying to play. Instead, his meekness took him all the way to a cross where, with quiet strength, he endured for all of us. So gentleness does not mean, of course, the absence of ever getting angry. Jesus did this several times too. It's learning to be angry about the right things towards the right person at the right time with the right response. Now, without weatherproofing with gentleness, what gets in? Usually self-assertiveness, where we become defensive or quarrelsome, where we don't know how to handle stressful or argumentative situations. So if you want to weatherproof with gentleness, stop playing to win and decide that your main goal in life is not trying to control others. Gentleness is willing to have hard conversations again, but always to help advance the other person, not to make yourself look or appear smarter or better. In fact, Galatians 6:1, this is such a powerful verse. Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should make them feel terrible and elevate yourself. No, yes, you're good. You're already shaking your head because you know what it is. You who are spiritual should do what? Restore him gently. You should approach with gentleness out of fear that, man, we could flip this situation, I'd be in that very spot. But because I love you, care about you, because of our friendship, I want to walk with you, I want to challenge you, but I must do so in gentleness. In fact, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 24 through 25 reminds us that gentleness learns to correct those that oppose us with humility. And 1 Peter 3:15 reminds us that gentleness knows how to discuss our faith in a gentle way with meekness. Okay, so gentleness is a powerful set of clothing for extreme weather. And then finally, patience. Patience is huge because it's about learning to hold people up. Think about it. What is it we get impatient with? I was impatient this morning. For me, it's things sometimes as simple as traffic. What is traffic? I mean, we got to break this down. What is traffic? Traffic is just somebody in front of you, right? But why does that make you impatient? Because you want to get somewhere. And they are in between you and what you're trying to do, right? And so the slower they go, the madder you get, the more impatient you get. Why? Because this person is in the way of what I need, right? They're hindering us, which means that impatience is actually a revealer of how much we're really focused on us, usually in the moments of the day. And which isn't to say impatience isn't something that I struggle with. Like, this isn't something I've overcome, because I still had all kinds of ideas for what this guy in front of me could do this morning. But what it meant is I had to stop and say, Sean, like, you're on time. You haven't had your coffee, and it shows, but you're on time. And even if you're late, it's no big deal. And if it's that big a deal, you should have left sooner, or you should find another route, or a million other things. But at the end of the day, is it fine? Yes. Of course it's fine in that moment. So patience, what it often shows us is how much we're really focused on us at a moment. So patience is learning to turn the tables and learning to trust God's plan. It's residing in peace in unchangeable situations, or it's making decisions to change things when you can, and it's also being gracious with imperfect people, which I really need, and you probably really need too. So I need you to be patient with me, and I sure want to learn to be patient with you. Without weatherproofing with patience, what gets in? Reacting, working hard to make things happen that are only important to you. Actually, manipulation starts to happen when we're impatient, because we start finding, like, what are the chess moves I can do in order to win, right? It becomes about winning. However, if you need to learn patience like me, and you're like, man, it's just, then learn to ask God, what could you be doing in this? Or who needs to be lifted up? And that's what we're going to get to next in this part 2, as we see that God calls us as his people to bear with one another quite a bit. So let's go to part 2, which is, I'm going to call it flashing. Because I'm trying to stick with this metaphor, but even if you have siding, there's areas where the siding doesn't meet each other, and you have to have something in there so that other elements don't get in. And I hope for my building friends, am I saying it like close enough? Like, okay, good. All right, because I know it in theory, but you know, if I'm missing a little, you can help me later. But flashing is like those cracks, because just because you have siding doesn't mean you don't have cracks. Just because you're wearing clothes doesn't mean you zip them up, button them up, doesn't mean you're wearing them in the best way. And so flashing, that protection under where the siding meets. And so even with good siding, this is important. And verses 13 through 14 address these. They're listed on the screen there, where Paul says we have to bear with each other, forgive grievances against each other, forgive like God. Man, this seals it up really quick. What compelling things. So first, bearing with each other. This is a tricky crack to get flashing under. We have to learn to do our best to be gracious with other people's processes. Now, wearing patience is going to help, but bearing with somebody is actually, it's more initiating, right? Patient, you can kind of still be, well, I'll be patient because I don't want to have a stroke, right? It's still kind of about here. But bearing with somebody means, you know, instead of railing on this person or being so frustrated with them, what if all they need is one extra person on their right or their left, standing, helping them one more mile, one more day, whatever it is? That's what bearing with one another is, okay? It keeps our lives in check, because Romans 15:1, Paul said this, we who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak and not please ourselves. Interesting that he contrasted those. He's saying, hey, if you want to bear with the failings of the weak, that protects you from pleasing yourself. You shouldn't be about you at this moment if you can help somebody walk one day farther, 1 mile down the road, to bear with each other. And then forgive grievances against each other. Now, you know, unforgiveness is a crack that allows a lot of nasty weather to get in, a ton. And that's why God's desire is that we learn forgiveness. That we learn forgiveness, and that we learn to forgive grievances against each other. I'll tell you what, and maybe some of you have experienced this, I know I have, where you think you've forgiven somebody, and maybe you have, but then when you see them or you revisit a situation with them, everything just comes flooding back. Almost like all this bad weather right up inside your siding. And you're like, well, stinks. There's obviously still some stuff. Now, I don't mean that if you ever have emotions about a situation, that means that you're not having forgiven somebody. Now, first of all, forgiveness is a process, but it's also something that we just choose to do and then pray that God changes our feelings about a situation. But I'll also say this, sometimes situations were just hard, and you might always feel pain about something, right? And you can ask God to heal it, and you can be forgiving, but those memories still have pain attached to them. This isn't like a therapy session, but I will say this, that the longer that you choose forgiveness, choose to pray for somebody, to love them, to bless them, that you do start to see some of that pain lessen. But more importantly, what matters is that we want to be right with each other. And that's a process of two imperfect houses with bad siding trying to reconcile with each other. But man, it's worth it. So forgive grievances against each other. And then he goes and takes it further to forgive like God. Because God forgives completely and generously and gently and graciously. To forgive like God is a high aim. It's one that's like, wow, you're not just saying forgive, like when you're little and you learn to say you're sorry, I'm sorry. Now say forgive you, I forgive you. And then you go punch each other out 5 minutes later, right? Like to forgive like God has such a depth to it. Because to forgive like God means look at what he did. He looked down on those that were crucifying him and gambling for his few remaining earthly pieces, his articles of clothing. The people that crucified him were gambling for his stuff. And he's looking at them saying, Father, forgive them. They don't even understand all of what's going on. They don't have the full picture, and will you just forgive them? And that is the kind of forgiveness I not only want to experience, I want to have the heart of God in me to be able to forgive that completely, graciously, compellingly. Final part, caulking. Back to my building friends. Because you can have flashing siding, but then where windows and things meet, you still have to seal all those up. And that's where you get the cool gun, which when I was little, my dad had a caulking gun, and I just ran around with it like I was G.I. Joe, right? Because when you're little, everything's a toy, including your dad's caulking gun. But when you get older, you learn that, okay, the stuff squeezes out of that and it fills cracks, and you shouldn't squirt it all over the garage and not tell your dad. Anyway, that was not a confession. That was just a random idea. I plead the fifth. Final part with caulking here, look at what verse 14 says. Over all these virtues. When you've put patience, gentleness, kindness, humility, when you put these things on, and when you've bared with each other and forgiven completely and forgiven like God, over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all in perfect unity. Caulking seals up all those areas where they meet. And the goal of our faith is to grow in love, to be a person that Jesus is dwelling in. Knocking rooms out, he's reworking the foundation. His point is to grow us in love. Love is the goal. So to truly be in love with God and to see his love rework and seal us from those things I listed, indifference, meanness, self-importance, self-assertiveness, and manipulation or controlling. In other words, love is actually, when we're over all these virtues putting on love, we're developing a relationship of trusting Jesus. Of trusting. And trust says, I don't always have all of the information of why this seems better than the things I want to do, but I see who you are, I see your goodness, and I trust. I put this moment in your hands, I put my life in your hands. God has asked us over all these virtues to put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity, a word that God is calling us to discover and learn more as his people, how we remain unified together. So here's the questions that I'd love to ask, questions for reflection. It's really just one and then a follow-up. But the question is this: what type of weatherproofing are you most needing to grow in right now? And I would encourage you maybe not to just pick all 5. serious. And here's why. My default is to pick all five, and therefore I grow in nothing if I just, hey, I need them all. That's true, but just look at those 5 words for a moment with me, if you would. What type of weatherproofing are you most needing to grow in right now? Look at that one and pick one. And then here's what I'd like you to do. If you picked one, there's probably a reason, right? And then the second question would be, what do you think God might be saying to you in this? In other words, what's the question behind the question? Why would that one come up? And what would God want to say to you about that trait in this moment? So let's take a moment to pray, and then we're going to close with a beautiful song. Father, I thank you for your goodness. I thank you that you call us to be weatherproof, that this is a world in which we experience extremes, we experience difficulty, we experience pain, and we experience frustration. But you call your followers to respond in the upside down way. You tell us to clothe ourselves with certain things, and you call us to bear up with one another, to forgive each other, to treat each other in ways that reflect the siding you've called us to be clothed in, and then over all these things to put on love as we seek perfect unity and as we're binded together in perfect unity as we do this, Lord. And so I pray that you would speak to our hearts about the area that we need to hear about, and I pray that you would call us to be faithful in how we clothe ourselves. And we pray this together in your name, Jesus. Amen.